Record.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Morning Shot. Byron is here from Kibuki land where there's no water or electricity. I am still in Europe, in the decrepit, decaying European country of Portugal. But what is perhaps more decaying than Portugal and PE in this particular regard is Action South Africa. Herman Mashaba's party is still around, of course, and they did quite well in the local government elections in 2021. But Byron, you interviewed Herman Mashaba yesterday. Well, the interview was released yesterday, and I watched the whole thing with you, and I was, let's say, very concerned about the quality of the answers that you received from Mr. Herman Mashaba, notably because it does not appear like Mr. Herman Mashaba has any policies whatsoever. Just give us a brief overview of what you discussed with him, and then I'll ask follow-on questions.
Yeah, so as a little bit of an update, so I interviewed Herman Mashaba, and I made it very clear at the outset of the interview that the principle of it was just to discuss Action SA policies. Um, the reason I wanted to discuss Action SA policies is I've already done it with Kenneth Michouet, who is the president of ACDP. That was quite a good interview. If you haven't already watched it, I'd really recommend you do. The guy actually had some. He's like the most based or down to earth politician I've ever spoken to. He's like
Yeah, I like
the
him a lot.
interview was fun. I enjoyed it. It was just it was so refreshing. And the key thing is that guy had a policy for everything. He had an idea for everything. And we're not asking for ideas that maybe even agree with. I mean, you're just asking for a policy. Even if the policy is unworkable or something, it's just nice to hear what people have to say. And the fact that he's got some policies and he's probably never going to get in government. It's kind of just important to know, like, what do you stand for? You're not just, DA Light, which is what obviously everybody accuses Action SA of being. So before we even start this segment and we kind of talk about a little bit about Action SA and that interview, I suppose it's worthwhile to note that as we predict on Morning Shot that there is likely to be an election in 2024. The ANC is unlikely to win a majority. They're currently polling at around 41% with Cyril Ramaphosa leading it. In the 30s without Ramaphosa, so the elective conference is going to be important. And the reality is that we're probably going to see a multi-party coalition. We don't know who's going to be in that coalition. But at this point in time, it's safe to say that Action SA may be one of the coalition parties, specifically because we've seen them being a coalition party in places like Gauteng and, the kind of Johannesburg provinces. And again, if we look at what's happening with Action SA, I don't want to rubbish them. So let's just have a look at some of the stuff going on with them. They're currently in discussions with a specific municipality in South Africa where they're looking at potentially becoming a coalition partner. They're starting to contest certain SRC seats at campuses, as student representative councils. They're starting to contest those seats, and they are starting to win them, which is nice to see, considering that those kind of seats have traditionally been won in the recent history, specifically since the Jacob Zuma era, by the EFF. There was a news article the other day where they recruited a former Women's League person at the ANC, a rather big person, which may obviously attract more voters. So if you look at them
Yeah.
from that perspective, it's nice to see that as a political party, they're growing quite nicely. So it was with all of that in mind that we're like, okay, so as a party, you're growing, you stand a good chance of being in government. What do you stand for?
Right.
Like, what are your policies?
And just as a preface, we are not. We want Action SA to do well so that the multi-party coalition can happen in 2024,
Correct.
right? We want them to be an integral part of it, but at the moment we are really, really concerned that there is not much there to vote on. So just
Mm.
quickly, Byron, for example, you spoke to Herman Mashaba and you asked him about, we're losing skills at a drastic pace in South Africa. There's a huge brain drain. A lot of skilled people are leaving of every single race and color. Unfortunately, we need those skills to rebuild the country once the ANC is out of the picture. What was his response to that?
Yeah, so I mean, how we got onto this is kind of like he's saying we need to focus, which I agree on. We need to focus of what the country's going to be like in 2024 when they are out. What are we going to do? and about fixing the country. A key thing that Herman says quite a lot. He talks about fixing the country, and we need to fix the country, and we need to fix the country. And so obviously the question is, well, how do you fix a country? I mean, I get it. You want to fix it. So I said to him, okay, well, clearly key to fixing it is using skilled labor to be able to rebuild the country. And he said to me, well, one way to do it would be to get all the old people kind of back, the people that have skills and that had kind of lost their jobs and been pushed up by the ANC. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. But, this has recently happened where Solidariteits actually were asked to go get old skilled people back to ESCOM. We covered that in a segment that we ran, and I think that video got over 20,000 views. It's entitled "Return of the Whiteys." If you haven't seen it, go watch it. But we also said, even in that video, like, you ain't gonna get these white people to come back for two reasons. Number one, they're too old to work. I mean, it's been 26 years since the ANC came to power. Like, some of these people retired and died. Like, or if they were young at the time, they've immigrated. So I said the people that have immigrated with the skills have all gone to new countries, high-paying jobs, etc. So I said to him, well, how do you reattract the skill back to South Africa to get people to fix it? And he said, well, the way that you attract them back is by fixing South Africa. So I said, well, okay, but you need to fix South Africa, you need their skill. So how do you attract them back? He said, well, we attract them back by fixing South Africa. It's like, mate, are you listening? Like,
No.
the only way to fix it is by getting the skill, but you don't have the skill because it's left. So how do you get the skill back? What's your policy? Oh, no, we just fix South Africa and they'll come back. It's like, okay.
Yeah, which is not a policy, because in any other policy or any other country, the policy is if you come back to South Africa, we'll give you a preferential tax rate for 10 years, right? In Portugal, for example, if you immigrate and have income from foreign sources, you pay a flat tax of 20%.
Yeah.
Income tax on that income. Like, that's a policy to bring skills into Portugal. Herman Mashaba just says, well, fix the country by putting skills in, but we need the skills to fix the country. It's a circle jerk of non-policy-ness, which is very concerning, because a political party lives and dies by, okay, it's brand, fair, but also, like, what the fuck it's going to do if it gets power. And if it doesn't know what it's going to do, especially for such a simple question, alarm bells start ringing, my friends. They really, really do.
Yeah. And so that was the first, obviously, that was the first thing. So then the second thing is, I said to him, like, okay, South Africa is obviously a really unsafe place. What's your view on firearms? And I said this to him because we've seen in recent times, and like, Herman's on Twitter quite a bit, and he's like, how dare these guns be in circulation? They're usually AK-47s that have been seized from somebody. And so I said to him, like, if you actually look at a lot of the illegal guns, they're from foreigners, or they're from police or something like that, or they're struggle guns. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, okay, and the only thing that stops the normal person getting robbed is their own personal firearms. And we've seen the ANC try to take those off. And he goes, yeah, that's the communists. It's like, that's the way the communists are. And I'm like, yeah, I agree. I said, but the problem is that according to the existing Firearm Control Act, it can only really be done by, like, the middle to upper classes, because it's kind of costly. It takes a long time. How does that actually affect, like, the guy who's on a lower class income? He can't just get a gun. There's no waiting list. There's a lot of loopholes. So what would you do to reform it? Would you have more gun control, or would you allow people to have guns? And so the first thing he said is like, okay, no, I said, how could you take away guns for self-defense in a country like ours? Like, this is, like, no ways. That's just stupid. And then he basically says, well, the way that what he would do with the Firearms Control Act is we'd have more policing. And we'd have more policing, and that would reduce crime, and there'd be less people who need a gun. I'm like, okay, but would you reform the act? And he's like, well, Jesus will help us. Genuinely, he actually starts to reference God. He's like, the country needs to return to Jesus, and we need to have, like, good biblical principles, and we need to have a safe country, and by having a safe country, we'll have more policing. And I was like, yeah, that's all great, but would you repeal the act, or would you have more gun control, or would you loose it? He was kind of like, there was nothing there. He refused to answer the question. He refused to answer the question.
And that's why I'm really concerned. So if Action South Africa does really well in 2024, let's say they get 10% of the votes. I doubt it, but let's say they do, and they're an important coalition partner to the DA, the IFP, the Freedom Front Plus, and whoever else might run the country. The fundamental problem is if you don't have a set moral foundation or a policy foundation, we can't trust you because you can just turn on a dime, which has been happening now where like they love the EFF, then they hate the EFF, then they love them again, then they don't. Like we don't even know what Action SA is thinking most of the time. And the more we ask them straightforward questions about what do you think of gun control? Because we believe as morning shot that more people should have guns and need to be trained in dealing and trained to handle guns for self defense. And you can't just say what I will do. I will just digitize the entire Firearms Control Act. That's a policy,
That's a
right? It's
policy.
not the best. It's not our policy, but it is one policy. But I don't think he even knows what the Firearms Control Act is. Like that's the
No,
problem. I think Mr.
that, and
Mashaba
that.
is speaking from ignorance rather than any sort of malice. And the ignorance is extremely worrying if someone is going to be in a very important position of power because ignorance makes you do things that are unpredictable and inconsistent.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned the EFF there. So I did say to him, like, look, one of the key things or one of the key components that make people worried to vote for Action SA is obviously they've seen your role with the EFF and you jumping into bed with him. Like, what's your approach with that? Would you work with the EFF? And that was actually a very interesting point because that was the only kind of real question I could say he gave me like a concrete answer as such too. And he basically said that he would rather Action SA bring the EFF into the DA and Action SA and form a coalition with them than allow the EFF to go off and form a coalition with the ANC. He was like, basically, all we need to do is get the ANC out of power. He don't care if he has to work with the EFF or the ANC, the DA or whoever. He's like, but he'd much rather have that than have the EFF go off and work with the ANC. And because he said if that happened, it would be a disaster. And so I agree. But then I was like, okay, and he said, and so like he kind of clarified that, and he's like, but I do that at a local level. And I was like, okay, but if you need them for a national level, like at 2024, are you gonna have him? He didn't answer that. So
Yeah, and I mean, I hate the ANC with a passion. Are they better than the EFF? Probably.
yeah,
The difference is the EFF doesn't have any sort of structural national power, but they're just waiting for that opportunity to get it. And if
yeah,
they actually say gives it to them, we are truly fucked as a
uh,
country. We are truly screwed as a country.
mm,
So again, zero principles, just like, the ANC's ultimate evil, so therefore the EFF must work with us. But the EFF is going to undermine you at every single case, and they'll just perpetuate and worsen whatever the ANC has done in the past because the EFF have no qualms whatsoever. They don't actually give a shit about the global community. The ANC tries to care about the global community, and they actually do feel a sense of shame. Not enough to change, but they do feel a sense of shame. The EFF are quite happy to go against all the rules to gain more power. And if Action SA is the conduit to that power for the EFF, it's not a party I can vote for whatsoever.
yeah. So I mean, there were other things that I'm glad you mentioned the global sphere. So I asked him about Agenda 2030. I asked him if he was a member of the WEF. He said no. I was like, do you know about Agenda 2030? And he was like, mate, he might as well have just said no. I mean, he gave me a bullshit answer that I was like, you clearly don't know what I'm talking about. So I talked about kind of like the whole digitalization of currency, the whole kind of power play that we're seeing going on with the WEF. I was like, there's obviously protests going on right now and, Belgium and places like that because of, fertilizers and all that kind of shit. The stuff that we've covered on this channel 50 million times. And
Yeah.
anybody who watches our channel probably knows about what's going on. So I was like, what's your view on this? And his view was basically like, I don't know what you're talking about, but I don't want to go to foreign meetings. He says I just cap all government ministers from going to foreign meetings, and it's like, yeah, but what you don't understand is that these people have infiltrated cabinets. They are here. They are influencing policies. You need to either take a Bolsonaro approach where you like I'm anti it completely, or you even take like the Poland approach or the Hungarian approach where you just like no, we're against this entirely, and you can sanction the shit out of us, but we're not up for it. That's another thing I asked him about, like the critical gender theory. The ideas of the whole kind of like the transitioning, the transhuman debate, and he was like, mate, it was like watching a chicken, and it was like watching the rabbit in the headlights. His brain just froze, and there were things that like when you asked them things on a global context, they were like, there was nothing there. The guy wasn't well read on global issues. Asked him about, the World Health Organization treaty on, ceding control to them, and he was just like, oh no, we could never do that. But there was nothing. There was nothing really of substance to it. And I contrast this to the interview again that I had with the ACDP. That guy, Kenneth, had an answer for everything, mate. Everything I threw at that guy, and I threw things. And like our job in these interviews, and for anybody who's still watching this segment, I congratulate you for getting this far. But for anybody who's still watching this segment, like some people are going to ask us, and at the time of recording, this interview hasn't gone live yet. But some people are going to challenge us. Watch it be done. They're going to go, you didn't push him, and you didn't grill him, and you didn't ask him this, and you didn't ask him that. Our job is not to grill him or give him a hard time. We're not trying to be the journalists asking stupid questions. We just want to give him a platform to talk so that he can show what he knows, what his plans are. And if in talking he shows that he has none, that's for you to decide. We're not here to tell you that. But what I will say with the guy from ACDP is like, I let that guy talk, man, and he had answers for everything. Some of his policies were like bananas. Like he was like, oh no, black people are useless and lazy and they must go work. Like, do I believe that? No. Do you believe that? No. But that's his policy, mate, and he could articulate it, and it's fine. He was able to do that. I didn't get a sense of feeling having watched, like, sat there listening to him. I didn't get a feeling that there was like any policy framework. And so, with that being said, I suppose we can close this segment out on the last question. Actually, I asked him, which is, how do you consider Action SA? Is it a right wing, a left wing, centre right, centre left? And he's like, no, we're just a party that's here to help South Africa. And I suppose that kind of symbolizes the dilemma, because you don't have any form of kind of like policy framework or anything to go on, which the risk is 2024 they join with the EFF. Everybody aligns with EFF policy because at least the EFF have policy. But now they've got EFF policy with Action SA votes. Is that really the situation you want to be in? I don't know, guys.
And that's a worst case, and that's a worst case scenario because the coalition will go towards the intolerant minority, which is in this case the EFF. Maybe not the DA. The DA actually does their principles. We give them a lot of shit, but they do say like market economy and whatever, private property, whatever. At least the DA, we know what they're standing for. They're a bit too lib for us, but who gives a shit? They know exactly what they're standing for.
But at least they got a policy.
That's right. Action SA has no policies. Let's be honest. Herman Mashaba has no policies whatsoever. And I don't think he is strategically very sound. And I'm afraid to say that he's not someone I can vote for in good conscience to save this country from the ANC as we know him today. Will he be in the future? Maybe. I have my sincere doubts. But just for you watching, this is really just about making sure you understand that when you go to the voting booth in 2024, think deeply about who you're voting for. Like, do they actually know what they want to do? Do they actually have a long-term plan? Or are you going to vote for them and they're just going to stab you in the back or do things that you're not aware of because they just don't have a policy foundation? And those people who don't have any policy foundations ultimately cannot be trusted. I'm just going to say it. They just can't be trusted to do the world of good for you and your vote. That's it.
I mean, my final comments on this segment is, Herman, if you're watching, you got 2 years to kind of cement a policy framework. And if you do that, you'll do well and it will be great. But I think in the current framework, articulating the policies, they're not there. There's a lot of work that needs to be done with a proper kind of like policy framework that can be communicated to others. We're not even saying the policy has to be workable. I mean, many times politicians do give, like the state bank. The ANC's policies, they want a state bank. Can we afford it? No. They want to expropriate land. It's a policy. Can we actually do it without collapsing the country? No. But it's their policy, regardless of whether you think it's balmy or not. Like, it's their policy. And there needs to be a policy framework that you can take to the members of the public and say, this is what I stand for. This is my ideas. And then you can do it. If Action SA managed to come up with those policies, I do wonder if part of the reason they don't have that at the moment is that those policies would look remarkably similar to the DA. And then that kind of argument that they just DA light would just be like, well, be day and night. So I don't know, man. But that was my feeling. That's what I got from it. You can put your comments in the comments below and tell me what you thought.
Yeah, so let us know. The interview is also linked below if you want context for this particular segment. So yeah, thank you for watching. Byron does talk a lot. My word. Jeez, Byron, you're worse than Herman Mashaba in your long-winded answers. But that's why we love him on this channel. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you
Cheers.
soon.